Hello, everyone. I'm Flip Pideaux. Welcome back to Old Bull TV, your insider's guide to political prediction markets. And it's been a pretty wild week in the markets. We actually had some elections. One for a House seat in Wisconsin's 7th district, in which Republican Tom Tiffany unsurprisingly held the seat vacated by Republican Sean Duffy, and a more surprising one in California's 25th, a seat that's been vacant since Katie Hill resigned amid scandal surrounding a relationship with a campaign staffer. Now, this election was notable and hard to predict for a bunch of reasons. One, it was a special election, which can always be fluky. Two, it was largely a vote by mail election, something we have virtually no experience with. And three, it's a traditionally Republican-held seat, recently turned blue and rated by most forecasters as a toss-up or close to it. But instead of a squeaker, we got a blowout. And in the days since, everyone's been scrambling to figure out what it all means for November. And the only thing we can be sure of is that virtually all of them are going to learn the wrong lessons from it, which is why I'm thrilled to be welcoming back today fan favorite and good friend of the show, Dr. Rachel Bitecofer, Senior Fellow for Elections at the Niskanen Center, a nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C., because if anyone can help us manage to make sense out of this, it is she. So, Rachel, welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm actually sorry we never had talked about the California 25th special. I didn't realize there was like a bunch of uncertainty about it because I think I talk about in my Congress forecast, that I thought Mike Garcia had a pretty good chance of winning it, that the Democrats weren't really making an aggressive push for it, that they didn't turn it into a big spending, line in the sand type of situation. And that, my rating for it that I released in that forecast, of course, is for the fall, not for that special. So maybe that was some of the confusion with that.
Yeah. So before we get a little deeper into the results in the 25th and what it means for your model and for November generally, we have had you on the show a couple of times, a couple of weeks ago on the unveiling of your 2020 congressional forecast. And before that, as part of our conference discussing new methods of election forecasting and how your models differ from incumbent forecasters like the 538s and other sort of black box wielding forecasters of the world. But for viewers who may not have caught those episodes, can you give us just sort of a very quick Cliff Notes summary of what you do and how it differs from traditional forecasters that we're always giving such grief on this show?
Yeah. So what I do is completely different. So you guys don't have to give me grief. I'm modernizing election analysis for the real world, the world that we live in which a giant pandemic sweeps in, comes in, wipes out the economy, and 80K, Americans, and public opinion is inelastic, doesn't move at all in terms of presidential approval, right? And that is not a normal world, right? It's a world that you should probably be adjusting your election analysis to account for, because the idea that presidential approval would remain stagnant in a situation like that not only really illustrates how weird it is that it's unique in the world. There's no other world leader whose public opinion did not respond to the pandemic, right? American polarization is that severe and strong that ours is unique in that regard. And I bring a new approach to election forecasting that recognizes polarization for what it is, recognizes that at the end of the day, an election like the 25th in California, outcome is going to be decided by the partisan composition of the electorate on election day. And that is going to be composed or comprised of the demographics of the voting population, white, non-white, young, not young, college educated versus non-college educated, suburban, rural, whatever, right? And I bring those mechanics to predicting the election results based on those demographics and something called, I look at polarization through the Cook PVI scores as a proxy. And I'm anticipating where can Democrats win based on this rising coalition, especially with the realignment of white college-educated voters to that coalition. And I'm really excited about the California 25th election and not being a Politico and not having a dog in the fight. I'm a big winner from it. So I'm happy to talk about this election and how it's a big win for the Bitecofer forecasting methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we want to jump into. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up the results here where you can see Mike Garcia. We're still waiting for some of the mail-in ballots to be counted. Right. The process obviously take longer than usual, but currently with about exactly a 12-point lead, which again was really not anticipated. As you said, you were looking for more likely a Garcia win here, as were traders on Predicted. Actually had him at 60-some% to win, but traders there in the margin of victory market showed him with something like a 1 to 2% likely victory rather than this double-digit victory. So getting into how this relates to your model, of course, as we've talked about in our prior discussions, part of what we like about your forecasting approach is that it differs from the others, and of course that it's accurate. Surprisingly underappreciated characteristics about forecasts are their accuracy. And after your remarkable 2018 success, of course, we've been looking forward to seeing how well your model does in 2020, which ought to put to rest your detractors' ability to write off 2018 as a fluke. So your 2020 forecast, which of course we looked at again in the previous episode, is notable in part because it predicts a more Democrat-friendly year than most other forecasters. So when we look, at least superficially, at the California 25 results with an unexpectedly large Republican win, you might interpret that as refuting your outlook. But that interpretation, I gather, sort of fundamentally misunderstands what your model is all about in terms of validating this idea that it's all about polarization, it's all about turnout. So can you explain how the California 25 result validates the lens through which you view these elections in November of this year?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to point out, right? Like the environment should favor Democrats, right? So like losing a special, like I think is stupid strategy, right? If I was running the D-Trip, I would never have allowed this race to go like this. I would have invested heavily in it. I would have gotten, if I didn't like the candidate, I know that they dealt with a progressive celebrity insurgent in the primary. I know they had that issue, but I would not have just. So like I was talking about on Twitter, the Democrats are tree people, right? Oh, what's the point of spending a bunch of money on a race that, it's going to be hard to win in a low turnout special, but we can win it in the fall when the turnout's good 6 months later, right? The Republicans are forest people. If we win this race, we're going to get a fundraising boost out of it that's going to benefit every other race in the country. We're going to be able to talk narratively about a reset in the atmosphere, blah, 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 right? So like strategically, it's not ever good to lose a race that you could win otherwise. But if you could put that image back up, because I want to start with the election outcome overall, it's going to give me a perfect way to talk about how the 25th is actually really reaffirming to what I'm doing. So like if we were to look at this, and this is how we would have to look at election outcomes in almost any place, but California's special because it is, not only vote by mail now, but also it is party registration, right? So we were able to track ballot returns by party. And therefore, in the days running up to the election, we knew Republicans were outpacing Democrats significantly in ballot returns, and that Democrats would have to have significant performance on election day to catch up, and that we weren't going to have an election day, like a normal election day because the pandemic and everyone was voting at home, right? So when we were looking at those election returns anywhere else, we would be party blind. And we would look at that and we would think, God, Democrats really screwed this up and they got hammered amongst independents, right? They lost the packaging or marketing war, their candidate versus this Garcia guy. And it's really a story of swing voters rejecting the Democrats in favor of the Republican Party. But because we have that special data knowledge of that Republican huge turnout advantage, 13 points, we know actually that this 9-point advantage is powered largely by the fact that Democrats got clobbered in turnout, right? And so everybody gets to see the election the way I see the election, the way that I've been seeing elections for several years now, and the way that I formed my theory. And so if you now, I don't know if you have the data by party return that I was tweeting out. It's on my Twitter thread that shows the ballots returned by party. But it would be great if we could show everybody that.
Yeah, if you want to continue for just a minute, I'll see if I can pull it up.
Yeah, so when we look at the ballot return rate by party, I'm not sure if the numbers have been updated since yesterday, but here's what we learned. Number one, we learned that turnout from 2018 collapsed, right? It looks exactly like the 2014 cycle, which in my New Republic voter file analysis in my work, I use as the comparison cycle to show, okay, this is what the electorate looks like when Democrats are not riled up from negative partisanship, and you don't get these turnout surges from key members of that Democratic coalition to show up, right? So when we look, yeah, there you go, perfect. On the left, if we just kind of hit the image, yes, that one, and pull it up, people can see. And of course, this was a snapshot in time from yesterday, so these numbers might have changed a little bit. But when we're looking at here was that, there was a turnout rate of 34. This might have gone up a few points. It's somewhere in the 30s. In 2018, the turnout rate was in the 50s, okay? And when we come down and we look at that party return, there was a 13-point or 12-point or 14-point gap in returned ballots. So when I look at elections, the thing that I look at, and I never even went and looked at the election results, actually. All I ever looked at was this screen. And as soon as I saw that Republicans had outpaced ballot returns by 13 points, I knew A, not only that Mike Garcia was going to win, but B, that he was going to win by a big number, okay? Because ultimately, when I say an election outcome is going to come down to the partisan composition of the electorate, and that's going to be fed by that second or that bottom graphic, that demographic group, the age distribution, the Latino distribution in California, it might be African Americans in some other state, and the college educated women distribution. When I say that that's going to shape the partisan distribution, that's what I mean. So those numbers there, those distributions of 19% for 18 to 34, that is 2014 distribution. In the tweet, I have a graphic from my New Republic analysis that shows how those numbers spike in 2018, significantly spike, and that that 18 to 24-year-old group grows 7 points over 2014, right? And represents a much more significant chunk of the overall electorate, making it more Democratic. And so in 2014, in California 25, the percent of Republicans is basically equal to the percent of Democrats in the electorate, and there you have a Democratic victory, right? So if you don't, and so there, I'm going to close with on that analysis with 2 points. If Democrats turn out in numbers, their coalition, which is independents and Democrats, that independents that lean Democrat and Democrats, that if they close that turnout gap, the election's going to go to the Democrat, but they have to be massaged into that turnout either through negative partisanship that's natural or like efforts by the party. And the second thing is, let's go back in our heads to that first screen Flip showed me, which was just the broad electoral returns that, if we didn't have the party info, we didn't know all that data, we'd look at this and we'd say, man, those independents, the swing voters really swung against the Democrats. But now we know actually it's a story of very unequal partisan turnout. Republicans just stomped Democrats in turnout. That swing vote thing, right? That perception that there's a bunch of suburban Republicans voting for Democrats, we can see now, we can literally see it because in this special Democrats didn't win, that's not what's happening in the suburbs, right? This perception that you hear cable analysts talking about, you hear Nancy Pelosi talk about all the time, that there's these disaffected, card-carrying Republicans in the suburbs who are fed up with Trump and they're casting ballots for Democrats. If that was true, friends, we would not be looking at a 9-point advantage for Mike Garcia in California 25th, simply because Republicans outnumber Democrats by 12 points, okay? Because some of those Republicans would have been casting ballots for the Democrat. They did not do that, right? Those Republicans are voting for Republicans. They've always voted for Republicans. They're going to vote for Republicans in 2020. And what 2020 is going to come down to is whether or not Democrats can replicate those 2018 Dem coalition turnout numbers. If they can, and they can keep the Sanders people from defecting in large numbers, they're going to win everywhere. And if they can't, then they're going to lose. And it doesn't matter what the polls say. The polls are basically functions of weighting that the pollsters, impose anyway on the polls. Right. So ultimately, that's what I'll be looking for is evidence and data that tells me about that. You should definitely bring me back on to talk about the things that I'm looking at as we move through.
That's really interesting. So to drill down on that. A couple of questions. You're referring to the way the turnout looked here in terms of the ballots returned, because of course that's what turnout is in 2020, rather than people showing up to the polls. So a couple of questions. First, is it possible, or do you detect that some of this may be a different voter behavior that we're seeing in terms of who mails back a ballot versus who drags themselves to the polls? Because it's something we don't have a lot of data about, and it's plausibly a different kind of decision in terms of if it's raining on the election day, or I'm working certain hours, it's difficult for me to get to the polls, versus I'm the kind of person who leaves mail stacked up, or I'm disorganized, I can't find my the paper ballot. Is it possible that we see a different dynamic in terms of that return rate versus a turnout rate at a physical polling place, either by age, race, education, party registration, or any other kind of demographics? Or do you think the ballot return rate here basically looked like the turnout demographic profile that you would have been expecting, even if we were in a non-male only kind of race?
It's the turnout demographic that I would expect from one party, the Republicans, investing, and really making a strong push with their GOTV and their stakes framing, right? Like, this is important, get out there and vote. And the Democrats completely dropping the ball, right? Some of it is candidate, like the Democratic Party was not enthused about their own nominee. And, again, some of it is this idea, like, well, what's the point of competing for this seat? We might lose it, and then we have this optics problem. Well, yeah, but then if you don't contest it, you definitely lose it, and you still have an optics problem, right? I mean, because I know what happened, but most people are going to see it over interpret what happened there, especially after a 9-point rout, right? But actually, I think it's a good thing that it happened, because it reaffirms to them just how much their electorate needs that massage, to show up and vote. And, maybe serving up, boring, digestible platforms and half-assed efforts is not the way to get it done.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the parties will learn, right or wrong, in terms of how you go about getting out the vote on a mail-in election for November, assuming it is largely mail-in? I mean, is there going to be more of a coordinated ballot harvesting process or voter education? Because presumably, if even a significant percentage of the voting is by mail, which seems quite likely, whoever gets that right in this kind of uncharted world of how do you drive turnout, ballot return rates rather than physical turnout in this sort of untested environment, whoever gets that right is going to, I would think, have a really outsized victory. And it's going to be some clever GOTV strategist, I would think, that's going to either get it right or terribly wrong. So, but do you have a sense of what they are doing or what they should be doing to try and maximize that return rate?
Yeah, I mean, do what the Florida GOP does. Find out what that is and then do that. They've done it successfully for a long time. They're the pioneers of that methodology. And they do it to a point where their turnout rates for Florida Republicans often exceed, reach 80% in 2020.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. I mean, the reason why the Democrats always come up short in Florida, even though the demographics are there, and I have to handicap my own model, which insists that Democrats should be winning there, is because the extreme competence of the Florida GOP. Okay, in ballot harvesting. Now, harvesting, by the way, just means picking up ballots. And
it's a scary sounding word. It sounds underhanded, but it's the collecting of ballots from voters' homes. Right?
Yeah, and here's another big winner from California 25 is that maybe it will take some of the heat off of vote by mail. That's, there's a ton of people in the Republican Party. Like I said, the Republicans invented vote by mail, basically. They're pioneered the technique. So, they would have an edge in it. And so there's a lot of party activists that are deeply, deeply upset that Trump has taken this rhetorical stand, and really turned the base against this idea of vote by mail. And California 25 just showed where they can leverage it, right? So, maybe in this. I mean, we don't want to live in a country where we don't. Unfortunately, I don't know that this is going to change the politics. I think, we'll know, because either electoral reform at the federal level has to pass in this fourth and final stimulus package, or we're out of time, right? So, maybe this will help get some oxygen for GOP reform on pro-democracy, vote by mail. But you're absolutely right. Democrats just used vote by mail very, very shrewdly in that state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. So, I mean, there's evidence that Happy can learn how to putt, right? But where incompetence rules the day, and it's clear to me that, if an effort was made to elect Chrissy Smith in California 25, then I would be very concerned, right? I mean, the public face, my inside sources tell me, no, it wasn't like they abandoned her, but they certainly didn't turn it into an Ohio 12 or a Pennsylvania 17 with Connor Lamb type situation, right?
And do you ascribe that more to sort of complacency or incompetence, or do you think it was seen more, as I think you alluded to earlier, if they were seen as really, putting the pedal to the floor and then lost, it would be seen as more of a referendum on their ability to win in 2020?
If that's the truth, right? So you have what you're told and then you have reality. So if the truth is that it was a strategy of disengagement, then, I wouldn't worry about what happened. But if the truth was they made a concerted effort inside to win that race and they did that badly at it, then I would definitely worry.
Yeah.
Because
and on that note, and I'm going
much worse than that,
Yeah. I'm going to pull it up for our viewers, but can you give us a little reminder of sort of what your top line forecast is in both the House and the Senate for this fall, and whether, if at all, how, if at all, the results in California and or Wisconsin have changed that at all?
Too, the only way that they could have done that bad and actually made an effort to win, like a real effort, is if they were chasing Republican women in the suburbs to vote for the Democrat, right? So, just in case any of them are watching this, ka-ching, right? I mean, the data don't lie. So, that's not how you do it. You got to make the percent of Democrats equal the percent of Republicans in the electorate. Bottom line. All right. So, so in terms of my forecast, my presidential forecast debuted in July of 2019, predicting a Biden victory with 278 electoral college votes. It's since been updated one time because it's not polls based, and most of the factors in it are fixed, demographic and competition scores. I fixed it, or I did update it after Biden secured the nomination to talk about how I thought that affected things, especially it not being Sanders, which I think would have been a destabilizing, condition for Democrats, given that they would have run two campaigns, a referendum on Trump and a referendum on capitalism. Anyway, that in that update, I did move Arizona to lean Democrat. And that was actually really in anticipation of the congressional forecast that I just released, where I knew that my, Senate ranking for the Democrats in that state would be lean Democrat. And those two races are really going to have a lot of feed together. Biden's very lucky to have Mark Kelly running in the Senate there in Arizona. Arizona is just really a state where Democrats have learned how to putt in electoral politics pretty effectively, and starting to really show a lot of electoral strength there. So,
and then in the House, pulling it up here, I think you've got what is the 235? Is that right? Is this your current forecast with eight toss-ups?
So in the House, what I do with my House forecast is I make the point that Democrats are really not playing defense on the 40 gains that they picked up in 2018, and actually are really in a posture of offense. They left a lot of seats on the table in that 2018 push, predominantly because of the outdated approach of electioneering that they're using. They have not adjusted to the demographics, coalitional-based stuff that my forecasting work does. So if you we're talking about the forecasting world kind of still being out of touch So is the electioneering, at least on the Democratic side. So there were places that they could have competed had they recognized competition, and other places where they chose to compete that were moving away from the party that ended up being resource drains that they should have probably not competed in. So I have placed a really big bullseye on the state of Texas. There are eight House seats in Texas that are theoretically competitive, especially because the Texas State House is theoretically competitive to flip, and those races are going to feed each other. I don't know that all eight could flip. I mean, they could, right? If the Democrats went full, nuclear bomb investment there and really recognized how important it is to get Latinos to vote and young people to vote, but they would have to accept the fact that in the suburbs, what's happening there is a generational realignment. It's about those millennials who are now approaching 40. They're going bold. They have children. They own houses in the suburbs. They are much more liberal. They might be Democrats. They might be independents. There are some former Republicans in the suburbs that are now independents. They left the party of Trump. They might have left even before Trump. But the people that hung in there for 2016 have generally stayed and are still voting Republican. And in fact, the Republican voting coalition is anything but dispirited. They are absolutely enthusiastic. They showed up in huge numbers in 2018, where Democrats receded their turnout in 2010 and 2014. Republicans increased their turnout. And I am expecting absolutely astronomical turnout for the Republican base and their coalition in 2020. The only question is, will the Democrats produce this negative partisan surge that I'm expecting and the independent leaners? They did it in 2017 in Virginia, 2018 nationwide, and in these specials in 2019. So, I expect that they're going to do it in 2020, especially now that Trump's policies are literally getting people killed and destroying the American economy. But I know what I'm watching for, and I'll keep you guys apprised if anything changes.
Excellent. We appreciate that. And one more thing I want to ask you about, since it's sort of breaking news overnight about the FBI seizing Senator Richard Burr's phone. This is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee in the wake of news of his sort of coronavirus-related stock sales, we might say. This is a seat that's not due to come up for re-election until 2022. But when Burr was most recently re-elected in 2016, it was by only a handful of points. If this blows up and he were to resign, creating a special election in the Senate from North Carolina, how would you expect that to go? Do you think that might be a Democratic turnover?
Oh, it would depend on who's in the White House. My expectation is, and looking at California 25, on Tuesday night, that if Biden is to win the White House and Democrats don't reform and I'm talking about not little tweaks, I'm talking about a massive top-down strategic reform of their electioneering. My expectation is they're going to have a very difficult 2022, and 2021 special, of course, would be very similar to that. I would not want to opine on that. Now, here's the other thing. I would not make the assumption that Burr would be forced to resign. We've, in institutional failure in America. Every time I get a chance to talk about that, I like to, because, in the old days, 5 years ago, yes, obviously, if the chairman of the Intelligence Committee was caught and indicted on insider trading charges, he would have to resign his position. We do not live in that country anymore. It's unfortunate that we don't. Burr himself is a man of, relative integrity. He's one of the most reasonable and rational Republicans in the Senate caucus. So it's unfortunate that it's him that's caught up in this. But, so I like to think that he would have the personal integrity to resign if he was caught up in something like this. But we don't live in a world where we can assume the scandal is going to push a politician into office anymore, especially in the GOP.
Right. Well, Dr. Bitecofer, thank you again for unpacking all this for us. It's always great to see you. Can you tell our viewers where they can find you and follow along with your work?
So I'm on the Niskanen Center website, and I'm very active on Twitter. I push out a lot of innovative thought and research stuff every day on that Twitter page. It's really highly recommend that you follow me there. And, I've got a ton of stuff online too.
Absolutely. And we'll put up links to both your Twitter account and your page on the Niskanen Center on the show notes for this episode. And we and our viewers will definitely be watching. Rachel, thank you again. Come back and see us soon.
Well, thanks for having me.
You bet.